In the spring of the year 256, on the dry eastern edge of the Roman Empire, 20 men went down into the dark and never came back up. They were Roman soldiers, garrisoned at a fortress town called Dura-Europos, on the west bank of the Euphrates River, in what is now Syria. For centuries the city had passed between empires, Greek, Parthian, Roman, a trading post wedged between two rival worlds. By the time our story begins, it belonged to Rome. And it was under siege. The army outside its walls belonged to the Sasanian Empire of Persia, a new and aggressive power that had swept out of Iran to challenge Rome for control of the Near East. Their king, Sulfur I, wanted Dura. And to take it, his engineers were prepared to do something that had never been documented in the history of warfare before. They were going to gas the Romans out of their own tunnels. Dura-Europos sat on a plateau above the river, protected by thick mud brick walls reinforced with towers. It looked, on the surface, almost impregnable. But sieges are rarely won by brute force alone. They are won by patience, by starvation, and, increasingly, in the ancient world, by tunnels. Both sides understood this. The Sasanian besiegers began digging mines beneath the city's western wall, aiming to collapse its foundations and open a breach. The Romans, hearing the scrape of Persian picks through the earth, responded the only way defenders could. They dug their own tunnel to intercept it, a countermine driven out to meet the enemy underground. For weeks, in absolute darkness, soldiers on both sides worked toward one another through the packed clay beneath the desert. Neither army could see the other. They could only listen, for the sound of digging growing closer, for the moment the two tunnels would finally break through into the same black space. That moment came. And what followed was, for nearly 17 centuries, a total mystery. To understand why two empires were willing to burrow beneath a desert town at all, it helps to understand what Dura-Europos meant to each of them. For Rome, it was a forward outpost, one link in a long chain of garrison towns meant to hold the empire's eastern frontier against Persian expansion. For the Sasanians, newly risen and eager to prove themselves the equals of Rome, capturing a fortified Roman city was as much a political statement as a military one. King Sulfur had already humbled Roman forces further west. Dura was smaller, but it sat astride trade routes and river crossings that mattered, and its walls were a problem an open-field victory alone could not solve. Siege mining itself was an old and well-understood craft by the 3rd century. Engineers on both sides knew the drill: dig toward the enemy's foundations, shore up the tunnel with wooden props as you go, and either collapse it to bring down the wall above, or push through to meet the enemy's countermine and fight for control of the breach. It was miserable, claustrophobic work, done by torchlight in passages barely tall enough to stand in, with the constant risk of cave-ins or sudden ambush from the other side. Soldiers assigned to mining duty were, in effect, already living with many of the same risks that would eventually kill the men in this story, long before anyone lit a fire. Dura-Europos was abandoned not long after the siege, and the desert did what deserts do. It buried the city, sealing its streets, its temples, and its tunnels under drifting sand for over 1,000 years. When French and American archaeologists began excavating the site in the 1920s and 1930s, they uncovered an extraordinary time capsule: painted synagogues, a Christian house church among the earliest ever found, Roman shields, letters, and armor, all preserved by the dry climate. But it was the countermine beneath the western wall that held the site's darkest secret. Inside it, excavators found a jumble of human remains, by most estimates, around 20 Roman soldiers, still wearing fragments of their mail and helmets, piled together in a space barely wide enough for a man to crouch in. Nearby lay the body of a single Persian soldier. For decades, historians assumed the obvious: a brutal, close-quarters fight in the tunnels, ending in a Roman defeat. Case closed. It wasn't until the early 2000s that a British archaeologist named Simon James, re-examining the excavation records and the position of the bodies, began to ask a different question. If 20 men had died fighting hand-to-hand in a passage only wide enough for 1 or 2 combatants at a time, why were their bodies stacked together, rather than scattered along the tunnel where they fell? Why did none of the skeletons show the kind of weapon trauma you would expect from a desperate melee? And why was the lone Persian soldier's body positioned as if he, too, had died suddenly, almost peacefully, rather than in combat? James proposed something no one had considered. These men were not killed by blades. They were killed by what they breathed. James's case built on details easy to overlook if you weren't looking for them. The excavation notes from the 1930s, made by a French-led archaeological team, mention traces of sulfur crystals and bitumen residue near the point where the tunnels connected, details that, at the time, drew little comment, since no one was looking for evidence of a gas attack. Decades later, rereading those same field notes with fresh eyes, James saw them differently. Combined with the unnatural clustering of the bodies and the lack of blade wounds on the remains, the sulfur and bitumen stopped looking like incidental debris and started looking like the leftover ingredients of a weapon, found at the exact spot where 20 men had died. Picture the moment the 2 tunnels connected. The Persian sappers, breaking through into the Roman countermine, would have found themselves face to face with the enemy in a space barely large enough to stand in. A sword fight here would have been slow, cramped, and costly for whoever attacked first. So, James argued, the Persians didn't attack with iron. They attacked with fire and fumes. Ancient armies in this region had access to 2 substances found naturally in the oil-rich soils of Mesopotamia: bitumen, a thick, tar-like petroleum residue, and sulfur crystals, mined from nearby deposits. Both burn. Sulfur, when set alight, produces a dense cloud of sulfur dioxide gas, the same choking, acrid compound released by burning matches, only in far greater concentration. In an open field, such fumes would disperse harmlessly into the air. In a mineshaft only wide enough for a few men, with no ventilation and only one way out, they would become lethal within moments. The theory holds that Persian engineers, anticipating the breakthrough, prepared braziers of bitumen and sulfur at the point of contact. As soon as the tunnels connected, they set the mixture alight and used bellows, or simply the tunnel's own draft, to push the toxic smoke into the Roman passage. The Romans, crowded into their own shaft with no way to retreat past their comrades behind them, would have been overcome in seconds, disoriented, then unconscious, then dead from asphyxiation and gas poisoning, without ever landing a decisive blow. The one Persian soldier found among them may have been the man who lit the fire himself, caught by his own weapon before he could pull back. It is, chemically, a strikingly effective piece of engineering. Sulfur dioxide is heavier than air, meaning it would have sunk and pooled in the low, enclosed tunnel rather than rising away from the soldiers. Combined with the smoke and heat of the fire itself, and the sheer lack of oxygen in a sealed underground space, the effect would have been almost instant. Modern toxicologists who have reviewed the case describe it as plausible, even likely, given the physical evidence, the clustering of the bodies, the absence of visible battle wounds, and the burn residue reportedly noted near the breach point during the original excavation. If Simon James's reconstruction is correct, the tunnels beneath Dura-Europos hold the oldest physical evidence of chemical warfare in the archaeological record, predating, by more than 16 centuries, the poison gas attacks that would come to define the horrors of the First World War at places like Ypres. It's a sobering thought. The impulse to weaponize the air itself, to turn breathing into a battlefield, did not begin in an industrial age of chemists and gas masks. It began, if this theory holds, in a cramped clay tunnel dug by hand beneath a desert fortress, using nothing more than fire and 2 minerals any ancient engineer could gather from the ground. Dura-Europos fell to the Persians not long after. The city was captured, its Roman garrison and civilian population deported east into Sasanian territory, and it was never significantly resettled. In time, the desert reclaimed it so completely that its very name faded from memory, surviving only in fragments of Greek and Latin texts, until the spade of a 20th-century archaeologist uncovered it again. Today, the site is sometimes called the Pompeii of the Syrian desert, a city frozen at the moment of its fall, its walls, temples, and, in one narrow tunnel, its final battle preserved exactly as it was left. Modern conflict in the region has placed the site itself at risk in recent years, adding new urgency to the work of documenting what remains. What the excavators found there was not the record of a siege won by strength of arms, but of one decided, in its final moments, by a far older and quieter kind of warfare, one fought not with swords, but with smoke. It's worth pausing on how easily this story could have stayed buried twice over, once beneath the sand, and once beneath a simple, unquestioned assumption. For most of the 20th century, the tangle of bones in that tunnel was filed away as an ordinary casualty of an ordinary siege, the kind of grim discovery archaeologists learn to expect and move past. It took a researcher willing to look again at old notes, ask why the evidence didn't quite fit the accepted story, and follow the physical logic of the space itself, to recognize what might actually have happened there. It's a reminder that history is not only uncovered by finding new sites, but by returning to the ones we thought we already understood, and asking better questions of them. 20 Roman soldiers went into a tunnel to stop an army. What stopped them instead was the air they breathed, and in doing so, they left behind the first known evidence that humanity had already discovered how to turn the atmosphere itself into a weapon.